Good morning everyone, I'm Shivangi.
My name is Radhika.
And we are presenting here the last weave of the crown. And
yeah, we would just like to take a moment to thank everybody who was involved in the process directly, indirectly, and all the interactions that we've had has been very touching and inspiring. And even like 2 weeks before, the feedback that we've received, even if they've not come out, but it's still there. So yeah, thank you.
And in some ways it did inspire us and gave us a direction to move forward, which probably we didn't know would be the direction after. So yeah, the feedbacks and all really gave us the direction on where we are today. So this is a recap. So we just began with looking back at the inspiration given by the mother and her sketch and how the different directions give different meanings. So since it's a recap, I won't go into the details of it. Next. Again, this is a recap. So while looking at the inspirations from the mother, we also, both of us being Vastu Shastra students, we also thought that it would be interesting to see how the galaxy model or the Oracle plan in general and the directional meanings and what could be the parallels between what symbolism mother gave and this. So next, Sophie. Yeah. So to take it further, the previous slide is where we left it last time. So take it further, we brought in the concept of Pada Vinyasa, which is a 9x9 grid module as per the Vastu Shastra texts. And we saw how the different energy lines, which would be the grid lines, the diagonals, and the vital points, which is the Marmasthana and Brahmasthana, which we would explain in a bit, would start giving us clues on how to begin working on this model. Before we go into those details, I would like to give a disclaimer for now. The kind of the enclosure and the space that we have defined for doing this exercise is what was given into the brief for this particular exercise, that is for designing the crown. So the enclosure, or what we call the Vastu that we have defined, is really the 100 meters on the outside of the crown is the boundary that we have defined to actually begin with this. I want to talk about that.
Yeah, so just to add to that is that if we look at the larger context, we cannot directly apply this grid to a larger context because the grid has to be redone, even if there will be a relation of macro and micro. But yeah, so the first grid that you saw that was divided in 9 squares, so these intersections, these becomes the Marmasthanas. And then the center is the Brahmasthana, like also in the last presentation we spoke about the banyan being the center and holding the very potent energy. Yeah. And yeah, what we found also interesting was after all this process, it was kind of overlapping with Ganesh and Neha's geometry and the DNA study. So we also tried to work around that.
Yeah, and these Marmasthana points are actually the main intersection points, and these are the points that we would normally advise for them to be kept more open, and since they are the energy centric points, similar to how the Brahmasthana is. And the idea to do this is also to see how the energy is spread and how we can start looking at the centric points and where the energy is spreading and where it is getting concentrated. Yeah, so then like we already mentioned last time that we would be focusing on the industrial zones. So over this exercise we tried to strengthen the industrial zone, which is the north of our plan, by making this the driver for the development, since it's the industrial zone. So we really thought that while moving towards the self-supporting community, industrial zone could become that driver which allows us to do this development. And also the concept which we mentioned also last time about how we can make the zone, the industrial zone in itself, integral by also having some kind of merging from the adjacent zones. So our exercise was to really look at the strengthening of the industrial zones with these factors. Next.
So then now that we focus on the industrial zone, the 9 by 9 grid also starts forming around that enclosure. And then we start having the Marma sthanas and the Brahma sthana of that enclosure. So, and then how this part relates to the whole, and maybe in future how that relates to the whole city, that would be very interesting. Next.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what we also strongly looked into was there is this. So we are all kind of manifestation of the one, the absolute, and we all represent something. And constantly we are trying to find the balance, which we inherently in the memory it is there, and but throughout the life we are kind of constantly trying to seek that initial balance. So there is this movement of the individual journey, which is kind of anti-clockwise, which is going inward. And then, so we try to connect the marmasthanas of the part, the whole, to the symbol of the inner reflection Matrimandir. So that's the anti-clockwise movement. And then, but we are also in Auroville for our collective process coming together. And that is really like radiating clockwise movement. So we took the amphitheater as our collective symbol, and then joining them to the marmasthanas and other points in the energy grid. And yeah, really coming up with some energy points which we can look into strengthening further.
Right, and also, I mean, we can start kind of also defining a little bit between the personal and the collective, since when both comes together and the path which we take for the personal and collective together would be what would really cohere and create this harmony that is there. Yeah, and just to note that the movement that we're talking about, the anti-clockwise and clockwise, is really when we are at the center. So while we are talking about the personal, we are at the center of the Matri Mandir, because most of us connect to that place being where our personal journey could be reflected, and the collective is at the Matri Mandir. So at some point it would be, we have not done that here, at some point it would be also interesting to just see the relation and how we can relook at these three centers that we have now created. Banyan is the Brahmasthana, the physical center, and the two other centers being the center of the collective and the center of the personal. Yeah, so this is again a recap of the previous one. So this is where we start coming back to the idea of the industrial zone and strengthening the industrial zone. So where we spoke about how the inner part of the industrial zone could be more of the quieter activities and the interactions, the city interactions, the artist ateliers, the co-working spaces could take really the center of the, I mean, towards the center of the city, and towards the outside could be the interactions with the outside world. So that would mean the manufacturing units, the production, and those kind of activities that happen outside. So
I just like to mention from the previous slide, also the movement. It was also very much inspired by Nicole's presentation of inward looking and outward looking. Both of them kind of, you know, coming together in different zones and different activities that we do in Auroville. Just wanted to also mention.
Yeah. Yeah, so before we move further, we also thought that this is a good recap to give. While working on this exercise, we really took this as our typical section where we tried to look that some of the infrastructure could be decentralized. For example, the water sewage. And for the other infrastructure, we could look at something like the trench rack system. So what we really thought was one side of the road could be the trench rack system, a service road next to it, and I mean, right now this section depicts one of the areas where the current HT line is marked. So we thought some similar place the trench rack system could come, and the crown center is here. So each time this would little bit differ, and this whole space we could start defining differently for different areas. So that way we have a little flexibility on how we are looking at the section of the crown, yet we give the space for the service and the infrastructure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with all this, we tried to bring them together into, and also the previous idea of us wanting to have different activities on the crown and them merging with the adjacent zones. So we really tried to bring them to a plan which is, of course, just conceptual. So to begin with, I mean, on this side, we have the first line of force building, which also is a part of Darkali forest. And so we thought that, this is the place where we could have the merging of the international zone coming in. So this could be the place where we could have different food experiences. And this was also inspired by Raj's presentation, where he really talks about the food experience being an important aspect of the community and of this development. So we really thought that different kind of international food experiences could be here. So initially we started to put those experiences onto this line of force. That's when we realized that this line of force really is entirely on a canyon and is also a Perumbok land. So we also thought that it would be good to give something adjacent, but an alternative place to give the idea of this community food experience. And how we name it is like a community food court. So not really like a kitchen, but because we are talking about diverse experiences and a diversity, so something like a food court would be an interesting thing to look at. Then we thought that while this is happening here, there could also be, again, I mean, for sure, there's a lot of things needs to be looked at, different phasing and what is required now and what is required eventually. But what we thought was something concentrated here can eventually start also spilling over to the crown itself, because when we saw in the previous typical section, we really have this space within the crown, between the crown center and the infrastructure, where we could redefine each time what we want to do. So we thought that this could start becoming something like a eat street, which could become more active in the evenings, while this area of the food court is a little bit more calm because it's more close to the forest and it starts becoming more calm. So it could start becoming like a eat street here. And then as we move forward, we thought that one of the line of forces, probably somewhere here, would be an interesting place to start doing the place where the construction activities, like the storerooms for construction, some kind of manufacturing that could start happening. And why we are also putting most of the activities to this side of the line of force is because this side is where the lowest level of the line of force is. If you could see in the model, this is where the lowest level of the line of force is. So we thought that this side could start becoming, and it could even be, the line of forces could even also be done in phases in such a way that we do the smaller part in some time and start testing it out, and then eventually we do the rest. Then we move forward. Then we thought that somewhere towards the center of this industrial zone, we need to have some places for things like the postal service, common delivery points, delivery services that could be there. And then more towards the center. I leave this for now because this again is a private land. So I thought it would be more nicer to define this area where we know the trees and we have the marking of the trees. So here we define like a cluster of services, which is more like the services for the people working in the industrial zone. So things like day laundry, some kind of tea stall, some kind of lounges, those kind of activities we thought could start coming here. And a cluster like this in future could start repeating at different places. So one could be somewhere here, and so that it can have different experiences, though the activities are the same, but it could start having different experiences eventually. Though in the next slide we'll talk about it a little bit more, but things like what master plan document mentions about the activities on the ground for the industrial zone, things like hostels and all can start already be happening in these areas, because we'll see that would also add to the night presence in the area. Then we thought that some activities like the stargazing could happen onto a line of force like this, because it really is the line of force very close to the crown at the highest level. So if you see this particular one, it's close to the crown and it's quite high next to the crown. And then, and then as we move more towards the cultural zone, we have something like a center for arts and crafts training. So we really thought that this could be more like the arts and crafts, which requires discipline, which really needs a bigger center to be there, and not just a daily vocational training or something, but becomes more like a center for the art and training that's there. And the current place where youth center is can also start becoming a youth plaza, which very well reflects the idea of the cultural zone and mixing of the industrial zone, which could have markets and vocational trainings, a little bit spillover of the crafts and arts center. So this is how we started placing the activities onto the crown in the industrial zone. To add something?
Yes. Yeah. So going back to the grid, just if we look at the marmasthanas, around these areas, what we would propose is to have more open spaces and not really built spaces.
And also from the previous diagram, if you see, this could be more like, because as per our way of working, the way we read the energy lines, this could really become the personal spaces within the industrial zone. So Dorley, I think, brought this up, which was very interesting, that within the crown we need also some collective spaces and also some personal spaces, so that gives us some time to reflect and be able to have that space. So these kind of spaces, as was also mentioned in the previous slides, these were the marmasthanas that were connecting to the center, to the Matri Mandir. So these could start becoming those personal spaces into the industrial zone next to the crown. Next. So this is just a diagram of how we see that some of these activities could have the night presence. One thing in the activity diagram that I didn't mention was a possibility of looking at Darkali having some kind of night camps. So that could be something like a Matri Mandir model, where there are just very simple little areas, so that will give a night presence there, but also a very good experience for the kids or for the youth in Auroville to start having that experience. Here was some of the Eat Street, so that could have a night presence. It could have some relation to also the nearby areas, and the stargazings and hostel areas having a presence, and the youth plazas. And some of these activities, like we said, as and when required, could also repeat along the crown, so that the presence is there all through.
So please bear with us for a few slides. It's a bit skewed sketch, but basically this is the town hall area, Sunship, and the path that goes Ilangarkai School, and that's the youth center crown stretch what's developed next.
And this, Radhika?
Yeah, thanks. And then, so every time we were thinking, right, from the beginning of the exercise, that okay, there's a crown, and how are we going to have this experience of crown going through different places and different zone next. And one of the main thing when we looked at industrial zone was also this lines of forces, which are gonna which are planned to be quite tall towards the center. So we were constantly thinking that these proportions are a bit disturbing, and then I think after the last feedback session, Peter, when he came to our table, like somebody asked, "What's your next step?" And we were really inquiring this, like, okay, what does this mean? Like this kind of high thing going up. And then Peter said that you will actually not see it. And then like 2 days later, it just kept coming. Like, what did he mean? You will not see it. And then next slide, please. And then then actually we started realizing that crown is not just the ground, but it's also the canopy that's planned on top. And one of the things that also came back was Mari's sketches of the reality, how the buildings are actually planned so far. But if they are close together and if we have this canopy, we almost have like a protection kind of thing from top. And then there are these cutouts, which when we are passing through the crown, you see, and then you see the sky up, and then you see some of these elements going up like that. So, and then next. And then it also took back to this idea of the changing phenomenology of the crown. And we have actually in Vastu Shastras the proportions, and the proportions have different names. So 1:1 and so on. And the highest one is kind of 1:2, which is Adbhutam. And Adbhutam means something that is wonderment. So, and it's not just architecture, but there is Indian aesthetic principles which are applied throughout different Indian art forms. And there are these Navarasas, 9 rasas, which actually take you through different emotions. And so we really felt like if we start looking more into the qualities that the galaxy and the crown wants to manifest, it can start bringing out these different qualities and evoke different emotions as we go through the crown. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so I mean, this is again a recap from our previous presentation where we were trying to look at the different spaces into the crown and how those could be dynamic with the different shadows being forming, and how it could adapt according to the different times of the day and different times of the year, and how we could get some gateways like the green gateways and all formed so that we can mark a little bit transition between the zones, between the park and the zone, or any other places that we require. Next slide. So what we really propose is there is a stretch of crown already existing in the industrial zone. So we all together look at it, how we can live it, how we can kind of start defining it already and bring some activities so we can test it out, what could be done. So this is really just a diagram of what could be done at the crown right now, and also a little section on top of it that while we do this, we could also start imagining the idea of galaxy plan coming on top of it. How would that form spaces so that as a community together, we can already start having some of these activities coming there. And yeah, before we close, we just want to have this slide, which we already showed last time, where we are really talking about what was existing around here, what is there right now, and what is yet to come. So kind of the layers of different, the Kala Purusha layers. So we have the purple, the bigger ones, as the archaeological sites, one of them being the Kali temple. In the center is the timeless banyan, and this is what was there, and then the existing scenario, and then what is going to become, like our galaxy model, our aspirations that are going to come. So and there's an interesting picture of Kali temple which I didn't show last time. This is a little part of the tree which probably was cut while doing the while making the place or doing this. And how we really read it is that there is this little turmeric being put, and they kind of redo this every day. So it's kind of healing the tree even after that little part of it is being cut. So we really propose that while we say the industrial zone is the driver and it can help us develop, we do this development very consciously. I also want to bring back what was presented into the Vastu presentation by Mona and Sashima about following some rituals while we cut trees, while we do any kind of any kind of movement towards this development, we really look back at some of those rituals and be able to do it consciously.
Thank you.